Welcome to the Cutting the Gordian Knot podcast. We're joined by Brian Curran. He's going to tell us about the intersection of Catholic social teaching and the thought of Nicholas Taleb. Something I'm very excited about, and somebody's thought who has popped up in a variety of episodes. So, Brian, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Jake. Happy to be here.
So right before we hit the record button, I started to ask him, what on earth is it that you do? Because he has something to do with investment stuff. And then I said, wait, stop. We need to have this recorded. So, Brian, what on earth do you do?
Sure. So I'm actually an analyst at an investment firm called Innovest. We're a small firm based in Denver that is we take Catholic principles as behind a lot of our work. We try to make sure that we're working in accord with those principles, especially in the way that we treat our clients. I'm actually relatively new to the investment space. Before working at Innovest, I actually worked in city government, in budget offices. So I joined Innovest, and I work in Innovest, what we call the back office. So I do a lot of stuff behind the scenes to make sure that what we're presenting to clients is correct, and to help them see things the way that they need to make the decisions that they want to make.
Oh, cool. That's super cool. So as an analyst, are they putting you on, like, I don't know, do you have to look into specifically utilities and that's what you analyze? Or are you looking at analyzing like a portfolio as a whole and trying to get the right risk profile? Or do they just have a variety of investment theses and you investigate those? Or do you have to investigate companies that are put to you? Or are you screening for companies and coming up with ideas? Like, what does that look like?
Sure. So there's a couple of different teams. There's a research team, and they tend to focus more on finding. Usually we're looking at mutual funds, private equity products, things like that, and they focus on our diligence on that side. What I'm doing is not, again, it's not as well known, but it's just as important. It's making sure that we give a report to each of our clients every quarter, and a lot of what we're doing is saying, okay, is what we're presenting in this report what they actually have? Can we make sure that our clients can make good decisions based on the information? Are we giving them good information and making sure that it's accurate? Can we make sure that we explain things that look weird? Because there's regularly weird things that show up as we're preparing the reports. And then we have a lot of clients who have a lot of money, and we'll try to make sure that we are reporting for them in a way that actually helps them make decisions, or shows them what they want to know in maybe different ways. Depending on what exactly they want. Building those things is pretty custom, takes a lot of customization. So that's a lot of my job, is trying to find the best and most efficient way to give our clients the information that they want and need.
Gotcha. Cool. And this is like a Catholic company, a Catholic investing company?
Yeah, our founders are Catholic. They actually used to work in various Wall Street firms, and got very uncomfortable with how they saw those firms treating their clients.
Mm-hmm.
Our CEO, Rich Todd, has a lot of stories about really sketchy, problematic things that he's seen in like the Goldman Sachs of the world, the JP Morgans. I'm using those because they're the biggest, not because there's been a specific story about them. But firms of that type end up having a lot of conflicts of interest. For example, they have their own funds, which might or might not be the best for the client, but that's what they're going to put you in because they get those fees. They also will sell various products and services, and they'll try to steer you towards those instead of maybe what's best for you. Then they also will charge you a fee for their advice.
Oh, totally.
And so they're kind of, yeah,
it's like insurance products and annuities. You get a huge kickback for selling those. I mean, there is kind of a revolution of like the fee only advisor guys,
Hmm.
and that's good. But I like that you guys didn't just like run away from the whole space, because it's important. People need to have money channeled in good directions to fuel businesses, to give people a retirement, to boost productivity, to do all that kind of stuff. But it's like, good, just compete. You know, if people think you're more trustworthy, that's kind of what that's a big competitive advantage right there. If you align with their principles, that's awesome. Um, so kudos to them for just striking out on their own and starting that up.
Absolutely.
Cool, cool. So you've been kind of had your head in the economic space, thinking about all this stuff. You've read a bunch of Taleb, and I
Yes.
think I've read three of his books. I know I read Black Swan, Skin in the Game, and Anti-Fragile. I think Anti-Fragile was probably my favorite one, and they're all good.
Yes.
He's a very
Hmm.
punchy writer. You hear, oh, it's
He
a
is.
lot about like risk management. There's kind of some financial things. People are like, that's going to be so awful. No, he's quite the colorful fella. You'll enjoy that.
Yes, he is.
And then you're a Catholic, and you've been thinking a lot about Catholic social teaching.
Hmm.
Um, and I'll tell the listeners basically how this episode came about. Is you emailed me and said, "Hey, have you thought about any of the intersections between Taleb's thoughts and a lot of this risk management stuff, Black Swan events, all of these things, and Catholic social teaching, which kind of dovetails well with subsidiarity, etc."
Hmm.
And I'm like, no, not really. I'm like, why have you? What thoughts have you had? And you came back with this like big list. I'm like, well, there's great thoughts. I'd love to chat about it. Would you come on the show? Let's do it. So, yeah, I mean, let's kind of start with maybe what's your number one? What started this? When you thought, gee, these two are kind of similar. What was kind of the first aha moment there?
Um, I think one of the big aha moments I start after, I think we talked about this a little bit ago, but I ran into New Polity, which for listeners who might not be familiar is a website that tries to identify maybe hyper local solutions to modern problems. Um, and sometimes they have some very controversial opinions on certain things like stocks, bonds, etc. Um, I ran into them and decided, okay, I think I should also go back and look at the sources that they're citing. So I decided to start reading some of the encyclicals, and I had recently finished up reading Skin in the Game. I went through Black Swan and Anti-Fragile, and I was reading Centesimus Annus, and um, St. John Paul was making a point about um, companies getting too big in it. I think it was section 2 of Centesimus Annus. And my first thought was, that sounds exactly like something that Nassim Taleb has talked about, where when companies get so big, they become too big to fail. And if they're too big to fail, they probably are too big to reasonably compete in the world. And I thought, okay, that's really interesting. And so I started I went through a few of the other encyclicals and started looking for points of contact.
Mm-hmm. Cool, cool. Yeah, I mean, kind of what clicked when I was reading, I think it was that book, maybe it was The Black Swan, was when you just try to iron out all the little wrinkles and variations and you
Mm-hmm.
just compress that down and you eliminate them, they don't really go away. They're just happening in the background. And then when you get some wild spike, some Black Swan event, everything crashes completely without warning. It's like, yeah, that's really bad. And it's a biblical thing, right? It was it Ecclesiastes says, invest in 6 ventures, nay, 7. And it's like, okay, maybe that's Proverbs. Maybe I'm mismatching. Another place it says to invest in. Some people translate it, cast your bread on the water, which is kind
Mm-hmm.
of a strange thing, but it means ship your grain overseas and generate a return through multiple ventures so that it can be profitable. Hashtag Ecclesiastes. It's like, all right, we see that right in scripture. Okay, you're
Mm-hmm.
going to need to diversify here. You're going to actually need to kind of keep your eye on all of these different bets at the same time, because things can look fine for a bit and then all of a sudden, bang, everything drops through the floor. Like there's a real possibility. And you think in scripture, in the tradition, I think that's recognized because we have a really long tradition. that says, hey, let's share some stories about when everything goes bad at once, because that's a real possibility. What are you going to do? Like, we have a whole book on that subject called Job. It's like there's a real possibility that everything goes wrong at once when you thought it was fine, and you need to be able to prepare for that type of eventuality. It's like, how are you going to do it? And one answer, of course, is we'll try to mitigate against that, but in intelligent ways, which are anti-fragile, meaning they get stronger as they get pushed. And then the more distinctively Christian answer is, well, ultimately, this is up to God. And the ultimate defense against bad things in life is holiness, because nothing can totally ultimately assault the holy person. I mean, that's a point that like Plato made, right? Was Plato? Yeah. I think he was talking about Socrates and him dying. And he's like, well, you can't ultimately do something that harms a truly good man. Holiness, goodness is a defense. Getting carried away there. But yeah, so going back to, I'm not even going to try the Latin, quadricio annum or something, talks about, firms being too large. Does it give any type of details about what makes it too large? Because you hear this critique sometimes, like from the left. Businesses are too big. I'm like, well, too big for what? Like, I understand, Taleb's point, just too big in that it creates a structural problem in the economy, like too big to fail. Some left groups are more, they're too big because we just don't like them. So we just want to kind of chop their heads off at some point because we feel like maybe they're too powerful or they're too wealthy. Other people might say too big because there's economies of scale, but there's also diseconomies of scale, right? You can lose efficiency when you get too big. But I don't know. What was the Pope at the time saying about too big?
Yeah. So I think that was Pius. Was that Pius the 11th? I think.
Could be.
I think
I don't count
was
Matthias as much.
It was Pius the 11th or Pius the 12th who wrote Quadragesimo Anno. He doesn't specify what too big means, and I think that's a trend that you see a lot in Catholic social teaching is. We're trying to give you guidelines to make decisions, but we don't want to be too specific because circumstances change, and what's too big in one age might be very different than what's too big in another age, and even what's too big in one industry might you might have a bigger firm in another industry, but it's less of a problem.
I might derail this. That every conversation I feel like lately is circling around to a podcast I'm trying to create, and it's mostly created, and one day I will create the podcast and release it. But it's kind of dealing with that because I was reading the article, the encyclical about AI, and I thought, oh, yeah, there might be some neat stuff there. But it was just so vague and trying to be universal that there was nothing that I could like apply, and there's nothing that I felt like I got new information or substantial clarity on. And I asked a friend of mine who was reading it too. He's like, it was great. And I'm like, okay, I hear you. You're just a really nice charitable person. Maybe I'm not, but name one thing you got substantial clarity on or you learned at the end of the document. And he's like, what? Okay, good point. So that's always the risk. Like when you're so broad, you think that your net is going to catch lots of things, but it turns out that your net, like the holes are so big that just nothing actually gets caught up in your statement. And that's contrast to the example I'm doing in the podcast is there's laws. It comes from Deuteronomy about what do you do if you find a bird's nest and you want the eggs? Like, what do you do? Right? Like it's actually in Deuteronomy that you have to like shoo the mother bird away first. And there's there's reams of commentary on this one little section. But what do you actually do? And the interesting thing is, if you do this one right, Deuteronomy says that you're, great will be your days, or it's it's almost the exact same verbiage to the promise after honor thy father and your mother. So there's, to my knowledge, this is one of 2 or 3 places where you're promised long life by fulfilling this positive commandment. And it's about how you get eggs from a bird's nest. It's like, What a weird thing. We don't think like this as Christians. We don't think like this in general. That's weird. But here's the thing. I think we are familiar with this a little bit. Sticking with the eggs, and I know that we're going all over the place, but sticking with the eggs, when I was a little kid, my grandparents had raised chickens. And I remember one time I go in to collect the eggs and I come out and have it in a basket and I trip and fall and I smash all the eggs. And my grandfather thought it was hilarious. And he goes, well, Jacob, that's why you don't carry all your eggs in one basket. And I thought, wow, that's a good idea. I don't carry all my eggs in one basket. It's clearly, too big to fail, if you will. I smashed them all. If I tripped once, it would have been all right. We could have steady supply of eggs. But that kind of heuristic and that type of like very specific example and rule, like, hey, use more than one basket, we can then generalize from that. So we've kind of lost that bottom up way of understanding how to do moral things and how to answer questions. And even like the church seems to have just lost it. It's present in scripture. I think it's probably even present in the early church fathers of the saints. I'd have to look. It's so present in the Jewish way of thinking. I can't feel my legs. And it's present in kind of like heuristics that we kind of pass on. Where on earth was I going? Basically, what I'm trying to say is when he says some companies are just too big, it's really hard to understand what do I do in light of you saying that. But when you say something like, when you carry eggs out of a chicken coop, you should have more than one basket. If anything, that tells me a little bit more, because you can say, well, I don't know, there's chance of smashing everything. And maybe that's what he's getting at, but it's hard to tell in the case where we go general to specific. And it's clear as day when you go from specific and then get something general out of it.
Yeah. I think this is one of those cases where my history training is kicking in a little bit. But I think also at the time, especially with Rerum Novarum and Quadrasimo Anno, like at the time, someone reading the encyclical would probably not have had much trouble thinking, ooh, maybe that's where we're seeing a little bit too much like where wealth is being concentrated, and we're starting to see, and we might be starting to see some problems cropping up. I mean, again, like during the time of Rerum Novarum, for example, like you had like the Cornelius Vanderbilt building a giant mansion called the Biltmore. I think it's the Biltmore. That's like bigger than, like as big as a shopping mall. And he got no joy out of this giant house, and went into huge amounts of debt and ended up having to sell most of the land. Meanwhile, typical family in the city, like you're in a tenement you're in basically like a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment with 2 or 3 other families. You're living in, I mean, you don't have indoor plumbing. Waste is dumped into the streets. And you have animals running around your city, doing their business, close proximity of disease. And so it's also, I mean, it helps to try to keep that context in mind when we're reading these encyclicals and try to know what's the context, to know what the context is, so that we can, because I think that starts helping us draw out some of the lessons. As part of this, I read Pachamentaries that talks a lot about the absurdity of having two sides that can utterly destroy each other in 20 minutes. It was written in the early 60s, around the missile crisis. It's like, I'm starting to see a little bit more what's being discussed here. Quadrasimo Anno, you have concentration of wealth, like in the state of the Soviet Union. You have concentration of wealth, you have concentration of wealth in a number of companies in America. You had the concentration of power in Nazi Germany around the time it was written too. And so I kind of see Pius starting to react to some of that, pointing out, hey, we need to be careful of this. We need to really consider whether this is going to be good for society or what the consequences are going to be down the road from this great concentration.
Hmm. Yeah, this wow. So the other podcast I'm working on is this. I have a long section which I'm working on the Industrial Revolution in that period of time,
Mm-hmm.
and I wish I had more history training because I'm really trying to get my feet under me with this period of time. It's
Mm-hmm.
different than people think.
It
Um,
is.
so I've been to like all the Rhode Island mansions. I've
Mm-hmm.
been to a bunch of those and seen a bunch that these like guys have built. Um, and I've also been to tenement houses,
Mm-hmm.
and some are good, some are bad. A lot of them, you mentioned, I'm sure some of them don't have indoor plumbing, but a lot of them have these community bathrooms. So it's kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
dorm, right? So you go
Yeah.
down the hall and there's like one bathroom, and a lot of them had electric lights and things, and they're actually kind of great. I mean, some of them are great compared to like the alternatives that they had. So if you compare it to like how many people would like live in a farm, how many people would XYZ. Also, if you look at their disposable income through that period, you look at things like infant mortality. There's like a whole host of different measures. I'll have the numbers up and everything for people if that episode ever comes out. If I get off my bum. Uh, um, but it's really different than you think. And then the crazy thing is, a lot of these, robber baron types, I always was taught in history class that they used monopoly power and then they drove up prices and they made this crazy amount of money. I mean, I'm sure there's some of that, right? But the wild thing is, we actually know like the commodity prices of, say, petroleum or coal. We know the prices of steel during that time. And the wild thing is, they fell dramatically. It's like, what? I was told that they restricted it. They jumped up and they took all these profits. Basically, what I learned from looking into this is I wish there were more historians on the Catholic side who really could look into this deeply, because it seems like the progressives, that they got that name first kind of in the 20s, were the ones who wrote the history. We're the ones who taught me history.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going back and looking at things like the size of a tenement home and
Mm-hmm.
the size of a regular home that was like in a rural area. And I want to see what the similarity is to today, because for instance, I'm like building a house today for myself, and a couple years ago I lived up in a place called King of Prussia. It's right outside of Philadelphia.
Okay.
Fancy little area, and there's really trendy apartments, and mine was tiny. I basically rented a shoebox. It was 495 square feet, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's tiny. Now that's bigger than a standard tenement home because they were typically like 300, maybe a big one was 500, but it was cool. It was kind of nice because it was where I wanted to be. We had some work opportunities that we wouldn't have otherwise. It had the most modern conveniences, and it's so easy to kind of be in our own time and look back at like a tenement home and be like, that looks awful. It's like, it had electricity. That's like, this is wild. They were freaking out. This is literally magic. And it had, plumbing down the hall versus out in an outhouse. It was near the city. There was city life there. The working hours were terrible, but you got to say,
Yes.
compared to what? So apparently on the farm at that time, it was a
Mm-hmm.
7-day work week. And it was common to
Yep.
work like 14 hours a day, 7 days a week on a farm.
Mm-hmm.
So when they brought it down to like eventually a 5-day work week, and then it's, 12, 10, and then eventually we get an 8-hour work week, it's like, what? This is awesome. And people flooded in.
There's a reason why people move to the cities.
There had
I
to
mean,
be, right?
farming, especially at that time, farming. I think you said it in one of your podcasts, was literally backbreaking work.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, like by that context, city life looked a whole lot better. Um, yeah. One thing to keep in mind too, a lot of the worst of the tenements are gone now.
Hmm. That's
Um,
fair. Yeah, they're not
like
all
they,
preserved.
I think Taleb talks about survivorship bias sometimes, where like you only see the ones that survive, you don't see the ones that didn't. Um, I mean, the tenements that like are just were described in history class were not like terribly well built, would not have survived or did not survive the 130, 140 years that it would take. Um, Again, like there's a reason why people came to them over farming, because it was you had more opportunity, you had a chance to make a better life for yourself. But like it wasn't good, and that's why the socialist movements started taking off in the 1800s, was because um, like you had all of a sudden you had people together who were who could say, hey, is this like an okay thing? Maybe it's not. Maybe we need to do something about this. And that's where you start getting some of the socialist movements, where you start getting unions, which,
Mhm.
I mean, that's impossible on a farm. Like what are you going to go do? Say to your dad, hey, no, I only want to work 8 hours a week. And he's like, well, sorry, if you want any crops, we got to work 14. Um, if you want to be fed, because like if you want us to have crops to sell, to pay, like to eat and to pay for more food, sorry, you're working 14. Go out in the field and start harvesting.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, we've kind of been. It's almost accidental the way that we kind of hit a lot of the points that like Taleb makes. We kind of talked a little bit about his idea of heuristics versus
Yes,
hard and fast rules. The chicken, how many eggs in your basket. The other thing we're kind of
random wisdom.
hitting is the skin in the game, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
when we think about that combined with subsidiarity, we're like, I'm just going to plain old throw up my hands and say, I don't know what was happening during the Industrial Revolution. If I was to write everything I knew about the Industrial Revolution down, I could
Mm-hmm.
probably cover one very sad, very generalized page, like just out of my memory. And you make the point that these people came for a reason. Obviously, we're always against fraud, we're always against
Yes.
misrepresenting things. We want to be honest, but they had skin in the game. Like they're the ones who picked up and they moved, and
Mm-hmm.
they're the ones subsidiarity wise who should be making the decision about where a family decides to move,
Mm-hmm.
live, and work. Well, the family, right? Like that would be the lowest level that's competent to do it, right? In
Mm-hmm.
fact, when you get to a higher level, they're no longer competent to do it, and they no longer have skin in the game. And yeah, I mean, it's kind of hard for us to understand, like, why on earth would they have made that decision? But we certainly weren't there. And I don't think that they were being dumb. I think that some
Yep.
of them made the wrong decision, right? Some of them
Mm-hmm.
made the wrong decision to stay at the farm. Some of them made the wrong decision to leave the farm, right? But in balance, I bet on average, the vast majority of people made what was the right decision for their family because they love their family, they're part of their family. And what else on earth would they do?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so, yeah, I mean, I think oftentimes we get this idea that we're always seeing the dichotomy that we get the socialist left say all the little guys are just being put upon,
Mm-hmm.
all their wealth is being extracted, and we don't. What we're really opposing are these super powerful concentrations of wealth in the hands of these very few people who are just extracting it out from the working class, and
Mm-hmm.
we're against that. And then you're kind
Yes.
of forced to choose between two different options. Hey, this is another Taleb point. That's oh man, send him write things down. Oh, what does he call it? What does he call it? You might know. Um but anyways, he decries that we're commonly put into these false dilemmas, right?
Mm.
What does he call that? Oh my goodness. Sucker problems. That's
Mm.
what he calls a sucker problem. That you're just told, like, all right, well, which do you choose? Well, you're just suckered into choosing one or the other. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we're commonly pushed into. Do you want to be like this caricature of a corporatist, or do you want to be a kind-hearted socialist? Like, what do you want to be? I think that's just kind of a false dichotomy because, for me, I'm ideologically free market because I want people to be able to make their own economic decisions freely, without coercion, without fraud, because I believe in subsidiarity, because I believe people flourish by exercising their rationality for the good
Mhm.
of themselves and others. Like, ideologically, I'm in favor of that. And being free market, being in favor of those things, is commonly very anti corporate, can be
Mhm.
very anti
Yeah.
company, right? Because what I'm saying is that we need to make sure that there is no way for anybody to lock up a permanent advantage against others through law, through fraud, through coercion, or through any other instance. So if you do try to be a monopolist, in my ideal world, you just get a competitor. And cool, now we drive it down, and now it's just kind of whack a mole. Whoever's earning crazy high profits, yeah, you get that for a minute, but then that entices competitors immediately to draw them back down to the market average. And the sign of a properly functioning market, and to me, is just kind of the proof in the pudding that if you collect a random basket of stocks just randomly,
Mhm.
it's not that much different than if you have a given professional selected. Or if you simply index, well, you're going to do pretty well. That means that the whack a mole is working. There aren't like permanently high groups, at least in our society, making like killer profits over the long, long term. Sometimes, right?
Mhm.
I mean, there's problems, but overall, I don't think
Mhm.
it's like what is being described.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that Taleb talks about is how Taleb talks about this. There's another writer who I've been listening to lately named Morgan Housel who points out that no advantage ends up being permanent.
Mm-hmm.
If you go long enough, eventually your luck runs out. I think Housel points out in one of his books the example of Sears. Sears was a company that kind of owned the world. Like they were Amazon before Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
They would send out a catalog and you could pick what you wanted, you'd send it back and they'd deliver it to you. Like that's how Sears got the Sears Roebuck catalog. It's how they got started. Back in the late 1800s. And then like I think 20 or 30 years ago, I think it was like 30 years ago, they decided they were going to like do a credit card. And then I think like stock for like Visa, MasterCard plummeted because it's like, oh no, Sears is getting into this. We're in
Mm-hmm.
trouble. But now they're dead. Sears is
Yeah.
gone.
Yeah.
And again, yeah. And I think that's one of the things that Taleb points out that I think is pretty fair is that you have to allow companies to die. If it
Absolutely.
when they are done, they're done.
Mm-hmm.
Let them go. And the concern is if you get a company um, that is considered too big to fail, because if they're too big to fail, then they are number one, you're risking moral hazard where they get to do whatever they want in the assumption that they're going to get bailed out.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Again, see 2008 as a perfect example of what happens there. Um, and then they also like if they know they're going to get bailed out, they're not going to be competing. And I think where I start getting worried about wealth concentration is when I see institutions that might be too big to fail. And I'm not going to try to name here, but for example, if there's a company that has 80 to 90% of the banking market, that starts concerning me. Is what happens if they fail?
Right.
What kind of bonuses are they getting and what kind of risks are they taking in the assumption that if something bad happens, the government's going to come in and use our money to keep them afloat.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and again, proposes his own solutions for this, which I think are I personally find intriguing,
What is
but I don't
what
know how
is let's
practical they
take
would be.
banks. Banks I think are the best example because most everybody hearing this remembers 2008.
Hmm.
And because they are like a structurally important part of the economy. And because I mean they're unique, right? Like
Yes.
if GM fails, we go, "Oh, it's too big to fail." It's like, "Is it okay, buy a Kia. But if JP Morgan Chase had its fortress balance sheet all of a sudden develop a crack, and we realized that everything was falling through the floor in JP Morgan, we have others, but boy, if that one's going down, everything's coming with it. And when we just say, okay, something's too big to fail, and I mean, maybe this is a bad example because they're kind of proving the counterpoint that they do get a premium for the fact that they are so safe. You know,
Hmm.
that's like their sole selling point, that we are the safest bank. We're like the biggest, baddest, safest, most fortress balance sheet ever. One time, Jamie Dimon was in front of Congress, in front of the Senate, and somebody was like, "Well, what could cause J.P. Morgan to fail?" And he's like, um, "An asteroid hits the whole United States." He's like, "Well, what about something other?" He's like, "A meteor hits the whole United." It's just like he just shrugs. Is like, I don't know. Like if we get blown up by an asteroid, that's kind of their competitive edge. But what um, what do you think is, I mean, it's all about, to me, the practical. Like when we get to questions like this, it's the devil is completely in the details. It's one thing to say, well, they're just too big, but
Hmm.
the fix is everything. Like the observation that they're too big to fail is like one billionth of the value, here. It's what do we do? Because some people say nationalize it. Now they made it even bigger. Now they made it even more certain to fail later. Okay, that's not good. We could do a certain regulation. But as Taleb points out, some of these regulations cause them to be more fragile. So now we're making it more likely to fail. What do you think we should do if we're worried about that structural risk?
Hmm. Okay, yeah. One thing I do want to give a caveat here that nothing I have said so far comes from my research in
Yep, yep,
in
yep.
my firm. I'm not researching stocks. I'm not researching particular bonds. All of this is just public information that I have picked up over the years. Again, just
Perfect.
want to make sure that that caveat is out there. Um, I mean, I think that is where we start getting tricky. I think on one level, I think that's one area where, at least on a personal level, you start looking at subsidiarity. Like, okay, yeah, JP Morgan's huge. Um, okay, maybe I should bank with someone else. Maybe it's a little less
Mhm.
convenient, um, but maybe it'd be smart to like, put my money in a credit union, a local bank, even a regional bank, and maybe it's even prudent to spread my accounts around a couple different firms.
Yeah.
Um,
A lot of rich people do
Personally,
that to get the FDIC insurance, right?
yeah. Oh yeah, that's fair.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, yeah, like I'm nowhere near getting FDIC or meeting the limit for FDIC insurance at this point, but like I have my checking account with a regional bank. I have a high yield savings account with with a national bank, and then my investments are with a separate um my investments are with a separate firm entirely, which it kind of it keeps things spread out, and it reduces theoretically reduces the risk of everything happening at once. One of the things that I think Taleb points out, and I think that I do want to mention here, is that nothing is truly safe.
Mm-hmm.
No one is truly safe, and I think we need to recognize that if we if we're going to live in a black swan world. Yeah, JP Morgan has a great balance sheet, and that. I mean, that's a really good way to like as a company, keeping a lot of cash is one of the best ways to keep yourself safe, because you can use it. But JP Morgan could fail. We could learn theoretically, I don't think this is going to happen. We could learn tomorrow that one of their accountants has been cooking their books. Um, Again, probably not going to happen, but I mean, It's happened with other companies, and all of a sudden, what looked safe turns out not to be. Um,
And what you just said about, I don't know, a lot of these economics, particularly, seems to be
mhm,
the art of making like impossibly simplistic, obvious statements and just simply
mhm.
layering them one on the other. It's less risky if you divide it across different places. So you got to kind of like stop, zoom in, and realize when this is practical. And like what you said about, okay, what if this bank is too big to fail? You basically said, well, the approach is for each individual person to make sure that they're their life, their capital, their stuff is safe and protected. Because kind of like what we were talking about 5 minutes earlier, we don't really care about the shell that organizes capital and labor and everything else. If JP Morgan disappears, okay, but what we do care about is that people can still work, that capital is still put to its highest valued use. It's kind of like if you're looking at an ecosystem, you don't go, gee, this tree better not ever die. Man, we really need this tree to be okay. You go, no, I don't really care about the tree. I care about the ecosystem. I care that when the tree dies, the fungus eats the tree, then the fungus dies, and then we have a hole in the forest canopy, and then small ones come up, and then the one that's strongest catches the light, then those die off and then get eaten by deer. And like, I care that it's consistently recycling these resources in a way which means that the whole thing is very healthy and that we can have any individual member die because they all die. Because man is mortal. Because everything here is finite, because we are not God. Everything's going to fail. So we care about an ecosystem that's resilient. So what do you do if you're a squirrel and your nest is in the one tree? Well, you don't say, gee, this tree better never die. You just need to know how to move to the next tree, recognize signs of weakness, maybe have a secondary nest. I don't know what squirrels or birds or whatever's do. But I mean, that's kind of the answer, that we need to let companies fail. We need to let them just drop out, give no assistance whatsoever, and just let survival of the fittest create things which are able to deal with all sorts of the shocks that inevitably come. And then cool. That's how we as actual people, and that's how we as people with invested capital actually thrive. And that's what we care about. We don't care about companies. We care about people. Companies don't have money. People have money. Companies don't have assets. People have assets. So we just use these as a tool in order to create value. And sometimes tools stop working.
Yeah.
So, the other thing that I found really interesting is he talks about there's natural variations in like a normal distribution, and they don't tell you about tail events. So, I don't know. Example is you drive to work 100 times and you say, how bad was my drive? Well, I hit a lot of stoplights. Okay, all right, that was this bad. Oh, the other day, it was beautiful. I had a lovely drive. I put the window down. My favorite songs were on the radio. Okay, that was this good. So if you look at just that graph and you say, how many standard deviations off until I have the worst ever, it tells you nothing about the time that you get hit by a truck. Or you go to a barber and you get a bad haircut, then you get a worse haircut, then they nick your ear. You can't extrapolate from that one day they're going to cut your whole head off. That's not how that works. It doesn't tell you about those black swan events. And, he gives advice like, don't care about the news. These are just daily small variations. That's really not going to tell you about the world or about risk or about upside, really. And, the thing that kept in mind there is in Scripture, it says, don't take any worry about tomorrow. Sufficient unto each day is the trouble therein. Like, don't worry about these small variations which are day to day. That's an explicit command in Scripture. And then, on the other hand, it says, I think I even might have written it down. I somewhat prepared. I did this time. Been so out of practice. Should write something down, right? It says keep watch, be alert, and then, well, if only I could read my writing, I would tell you. But it says that evil can spring upon you quickly, and to be watchful. And that's what it's doing. It's saying on one side, don't worry about day-to-day variation, and on the other side, you actually have to take care for your eternal future. You have to take care for your soul. You need to watch for the day of the Lord. It could be his second coming, or just could be your death, which may spring upon you without warning. So care about like the big black swan events. You die, you go to hell, everything goes terrible. And don't worry about day-to-day variation. That sounds that sounds like, I don't know, Black Swan, the book.
Yeah. I mean, do you remember his section on the turkey problem?
The turkey problem. Yeah, I do, but tell the listeners.
Yeah, so the turkey problem is that if you are a turkey, every day you're fed by a human, and every day your confidence increases that humans exist to feed you. and that they care about your well-being. And then all of a sudden, around mid-November, something changes, and you kind of have to revise your belief that humans are looking out for your best interest, because what do you know? Next thing, you are on someone's plate for Thanksgiving. The point being that just because the trend that has been occurring, well, great, that trend can keep going, but it can suddenly stop without warning, and you don't know for sure that that trend is going to keep going.
Mm-hmm.
Unprecedented things happen all the time in history.
Right.
Um, so yeah, the trends continue until they don't. And if you rely on so it's not a good idea to rely on a trend to keep continuing, because tomorrow it could stop. I mean, again, like there's so many examples of it. I think the one that comes to mind most vividly for me was back during COVID. Um, we were just marching along. There were some things in the news about maybe this disease coming, and then all of a sudden, those states had locked everyone down for a
Mm-hmm.
few weeks. Um, and then all of a sudden, there was no grocery stores were empty because all the businesses had over optimized their supply line so that um, they that their items would arrive as soon as they typically ran out.
Right.
Um, and
Of course.
guess what? Supplies didn't come in time, or the supplies flew off the shelves faster because everyone was scared.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I vividly remember searching for toilet paper around that time. It was because like the supply chains weren't ready for it, and then everyone saw that it was a rare commodity and went and bought more.
And I always think about this whenever there's a hurricane. I can tell you exactly what's going to happen in the news,
Mm-hmm.
right? You're going to talk about the hurricane and things. Then they're going to talk about some of these awful, what do they call them? Price gougers that
Mm-hmm.
come in and sell generators for 3 times the amount to these poor people in the wake of the hurricane. And then you go, wait a minute, we're going to put in these price gouging laws so you can only get so much of a margin. Well, that's sweet that you had this little idea, but the problem is you're causing a continued problem into the future when we could have it solved. Like, here's what would happen if we just trusted people to act in their own interest. Somebody would say, hurricanes come to this area fairly often, and I could make 3 times the amount on a generator. So I'm going to buy a bunch of generators when they're cheap, and I'm going to warehouse them, and I'm going to hold them. And then when this comes, yes, people will pay high prices, but they get a generator versus it's the first come, first serve. And yeah, they got a cheap generator, but then everybody else just doesn't have one.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that people are willing to pay the high prices says this is worthwhile for them. And the cool thing is, maybe the first year, this guy makes a crazy profit. Lovely. But hey, more people got generators. I say that if there were more transactions like that, all the ones that were free and fair over at Lowe's for $400, and you get people who both believe they benefited at $1,100, then the overall well-being of this group is higher. But just wait till the next time the hurricane comes, because now they go, dude, that guy made a killing on those generators. If I just
Mm-hmm.
bought some generators, I held them in a warehouse, or if I just shipped them down, right? So now we create warehousing, we create a stockpile, and then we
Mm-hmm.
have this new supply chain in the event of emergency. And we're building out this new little ecosystem of emergency supplies. Why? Because we allowed prices, we allowed people to act in their own best interest. So next time the hurricane comes and it hits, well, a lot of those crazy high profits are competed away, and the supply of generators actually has a more steady emergency um, flow into that community. Warehouses open up, things start to flood out, and now prices are more stable because we've
Mm-hmm.
made this whole emergency market more robust. Like, that's an example of like that anti-fragile thinking, that subsidiarity thinking, that trusting individuals to act for their own best interest, that makes it more durable, and people get power at the end. Um, yeah, I mean, but I think reflexively we just go, oh, they're being mean. We have this like socialist reflex that anytime people are making profits, it's not a signal, it's not a reward, It's not anything like that. It's some type of exploitation. And I think that's something we got to get rid of.
Yeah. Do you mind if I push back on that just a little bit?
Do it. Bring it on.
Okay. So yeah, I think in this situation, I think that's yeah, perfectly fair. I think my personal concern comes more not so much with the generators, but if say in the aftermath of this hurricane, most companies are going to charge extra on their groceries because it's going to cost them more to get there.
Mm-hmm.
Occasionally you do have some people who are going to say, okay, I'm going to I'm going to charge even more than that to
Mm-hmm.
try to take advantage. Let's say supply lines are going back to normal. I'm no longer able to, or I'm no longer needing to raise my prices as high. But maybe I can keep them elevated for a little longer. Sometimes, again, no issue because there's competition. But especially
Mm-hmm.
if you're in like a smaller town, there's maybe one grocer, and he happens to be, say, maybe not the most morally scrupulous.
Mm-hmm.
Um, something in a case like that, do you think that a price gouging law might make sense?
Um, at the small enough
Something that's just
scale,
tailored.
I would say either a social sanction or a law. Here's why. So I think a lot of people uh, make a big scaling problem. They're taking what they would do with their friends and neighbors and family, and then they're stretching that out into the economic sphere. But I think that those are different, and they have different like telos. So inside of the market, the goal is to be profitable, to be productive, to do those things. Inside of the family or inside of a friend group, well, there's different goals, right? You're supposed to just kind of there's a type of friendship and mutual love there, which is very different from the friendship of simply utility that you get out in the market sphere. So I think this is the main problem behind a lot of things that we see from like economic commentary from the Middle Ages. For instance, I think it's my number one reason why we don't have to worry about usury anymore. There's a whole episode with Matthew Advent about that. It's
Mm-hmm.
because it's not right to charge interest to like your brother or your mom or your friend. Why? Because that's basically saying, hey, I think that it's better for me to have this than you. Whereas in a true friendship, like Aristotle describes, a benefit to my friend or my neighbor is the same as a benefit to me. So it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't actually matter where it moves. Simply a diffusion of goods is perfectly fine. And there really shouldn't be any like, it's just based on need. It's kind of like the way that the early church functioned. However, once you scale up the type of information which is necessary to do that, the type of trust which is needed in order to facilitate that exchange is just gone. So what we use instead is the price mechanism.
Mm-hmm.
And when you get to a small town, if you get small enough where there's just like one grocer where you just like what you described, and that's the only option, yeah, that's starting to blur the line, right? It's more like a friendship, it's more like family relationships. So
Mm-hmm.
I'd say the most effective thing to do there would be social sanctions. And typically, when you go to small towns, you'll find people who just talk like that naturally. Like, well, no, that's too much. No, I wouldn't do that. Well, those prices just
Yeah,
taking advantage
that's
of
true.
people, right? And then when you go to like big cities where everybody's shopping from a nameless, faceless corporation, you don't really hear that quite as much. And that's just a question of scale. And I think society has long evolved to answer the question, what do you do at a small scale if resources are scarce? And people are actually pretty good at that. So that's kind of, I don't know if that's a great answer. But as far as once we get to a larger scale where there's competing companies, as soon as there's the possibility of competing this away, I don't think that we should have any law, right? Um, because in that case, it's, I mean, we already have a check which allows people to act in their best interest and simply shop somewhere else and prices to come to an equilibrium. And it also punishes people who are really, truly trying to be exploiting a situation. And not just in that one day where nobody buys it and they go somewhere else, or the next time when they decide who to shop with, but it's like a permanent brand problem that can completely crush a company. Like if I knew that like my parents were down in Florida and there was one grocer that had all of the water and they charge these crazy prices, and I knew that it was just to screw them. I wouldn't shop at that store. It'd cause a permanent problem. I don't know. I just worry that the solution can be worse than the problem sometimes. I don't know. What do
Sure.
you think about that?
I mean, I think that's fair. I think so. Just for some context, one of the things that I'm thinking of is I went to college in a small town in Kansas, and in that town there was a major national retailer chain that had moved in several years back, um, and had gradually like undercutting the other grocery stores in in the town. And at that point there were maybe one or two left. Um, but I mean, the way it was going is eventually that national chain was going to be the only one left.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, we start getting some skin in the game issues, um, like the one you talked about with social sanction. Yeah, if I own a local grocery store in a small town, I decide to do something bad, well, I'm going to suffer for it. I've got skin in the game. All of a sudden, I'm going to stop getting invited to um, like whatever events. I'm gonna suffer socially. But if I own like the giant, if I'm part of a national chain, and all of a sudden it's the only store in town, yeah, I mean people can go to other towns, and yeah, like they're not forced to shop there, but it is the most likely place you're going to go when it's the only game in town, and we start hitting a place where I don't know, things just get complicated, and it's hard to identify exactly how to treat them because they no longer have the skin in the game that the local store might have had.
That's the bet. Okay, so I think that's the strongest case. Is it's one store, small town, no
Hmm.
alternatives, and it's not locally run little place. It's a bit so it's a Food Lion, um, and they're sitting there and they're jacking up prices. Um, I would say I would still lean on let's not do a law, and here's why: because there's still an alternative to buying it then, and it's not necessarily moving or getting it somewhere else; it's getting it earlier. So long as people have the knowledge that this happens, and
Yes.
maybe I would prefer a law that says that, like you need to post in ahead of time what your response is
Hmm.
to an emergency. I would like that law,
Oh, I like
right?
that.
So now we just say, I'm just going to let you guys know that if a hurricane comes through and we need to deal with this, we're going to jack up prices by 300%. And you might think that's unfair, but hey, our cost to replace it has gone up a bunch. And hey, this lures other people in to compete. And hey, that's the way the market works. But I would prefer that. Tell us what you're
I
going to
mean, I
do.
think that,
At which point, the question is, who is going to be stockpiling food for an emergency? The store? That costs money. Or you? That costs money. I don't think you have a right to force the store to stockpile enough food on your behalf and sell it at the market rate.
mhm.
But their profits could be checked by other people doing precisely that. I'll just have some
Mm.
extra toilet paper in my basement and I'll have some stuff down there. And there you go. So you try to raise the price, you can't. You're not going to sell anything because we just draw down our reserves. But what do you think of that? Just publish what your response is to an emergency, and then people know. And we don't
I
even
like
have to go through the terrible, painful, oh no, Food Lion
that.
jacked it up and nobody had anything in the basement stage.
Yeah. No, I mean, I kind of like that, and then you can also hold them accountable
Yeah,
at that point.
whatever you do,
Um,
whatever they say is
yeah.
fine. We just
Mhm.
know in advance, like, hey, we're not going to hold a stockpile. We're not going to do this. We're just going to let the prices rise. And some of
Mhm.
you are going to be able to source it cheaper, and that's cool. Or whatever. Because it's their company, they can pick their policy. We just let people know so they can plan around it.
Sure. I mean, no, I think
Done.
I kind of like that idea. That feels that feels distinctly Talebian to me too. That he's like, okay, like here you go. Yeah. Again, I don't have a necessarily dog in this fight. It's just something that yeah, something that's interesting to think about.
Well, I really like that idea.
Yeah.
And it's conversations like this that ideas like this come up. because if
Yeah.
everybody just keeps, I'm glad you gave that pushback. Because I'm like, oh, no, okay. Oh, yeah. National store. That's tricky. How do you deal with that?
Mhm.
And,
Yeah.
it's, principles like that, like we've kind of had loaded in our head, kind of help us come
Mhm.
up with it, ideas like
Yeah.
that. So, yeah. Well, that's solved. We should tell somebody about that.
Yeah.
Man, back to banking. I mean, we think about price fixing and all this stuff. That FDIC insurance, when I had Dr. Lawrence White on, we spent probably the back half of the podcast just talking about why don't we have a market based FDIC insurance? Because it's really not fair. I mean, it slightly varies, um, but we don't have it actually privatized for that reinsurance banks. What's going on there? Because now we're creating a false sense of security with banks, and we're not actually charging based on risk appropriately like the market would do. So now we're allowing risk to pool up in areas which are going unchecked by what would naturally check it, and that would be insurance premiums. Normally, insurance providers are meant to be a check against crazy risk. We raise your premium. What, you're going to put an 18-year-old in that convertible Lamborghini? Oh, we're going to raise your rates. Look, okay, get him a Jeep. But
Yeah. I mean, so here, I don't know, I might be able to speak to this a little bit more. So I think in this case, I don't know exactly where Taleb falls in this, but I do see the rationale of having the federal government doing this. Again, FDIC is a Depression era program. Um, so again, Great Depression hits. A bunch of people are in stocks. A lot of people have stocks on margin, which is again for listeners who aren't sure, that's where you borrow money from someone to buy stocks. Especially when stocks go down, borrowers tend to make margin calls, which is where they require you to get that back. So what happens sometimes if you're very leveraged, if you have a lot of debt, a lot of margin, that can cause some problems for you if you have stocks that are all of a sudden much lower in value and you have to sell them so you can pay back your loan.
mm-hmm.
Happened to a lot of people in the Depression. Also back then, you would have bank runs where um, everyone would go to the bank, try to pull all their money out, and then the bank would fail because banks only keep a certain level of reserves. So the whole point of the FDIC, I think this is what Roosevelt was thinking, is okay, we can stop bank runs and we can stop systematic bank failure across the country by saying the federal government will guarantee to the people who put their savings in up to a certain amount. The bank can still fail, but in this case, you will still be at least partially whole.
Mm-hmm.
You will be able to get your money. There might be some delay, but you'll get your money back. And if you're a private insurer and all of a sudden banks across the country are losing money, all of a sudden there's a chance that you might go out of business and aren't able to properly insure
Mm-hmm.
because again, don't know what the risk is.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, that's tricky, right?
Mm-hmm.
It makes
Yeah.
sense that we have to have a backstop somewhere. I do worry about, well, if we're centralizing all into the federal government, then we get that period of things are great for an incredibly long time. I guess this is different because they can just be like, turn on the money printer.
I mean,
Work their way out
that's
of
the
it,
thing.
right?
Yeah. So one of sorry, there's a couple thoughts in my head right now. Um, yeah. So one of the things I've been thinking about with the rates is recently, I think it was last year or the year before, homeowner insurance rates went up, like skyrocketed for most people across the country.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because the reinsurance had been mispricing risk and had taken a lot of losses due to like fires in California, hurricanes in Florida, etc. And all of a sudden realized, oh shoot, we're losing money. And so they had to jack up the rate substantially. Yeah. So that's one of the things I'm thinking of, just kind of like we don't really know what the risks are. And I think Taleb points this out, that if there's if there is something that is too big to fail, he actually recommends either requiring that, basically, yeah, if you say, hey, you're too big to fail, you could get government money. He recommends either nationalizing it so that it's just very clear what's going on ahead of time, and or making sure that anyone in that industry cannot be paid more than a civil servant.
Hmm.
So that that way, like in that case, you are not getting bonuses for risky behavior, and trying to kind of like centralize that, because the FDIC itself is, I have a friend who works at the FDIC, and he could answer this much more clearly than I could. I'm probably going to botch some of it, but the FDIC is kind of like a governmental corporation. It is a corporation. It's supposed to cover its costs from the insurance payments, and it's supposed to cover the payouts that it gives, um, but like through its premiums. And so, like after Silicon Valley Bank failed a couple of years ago, I believe that the FDIC actually raised its rates, because it
Mm-hmm.
had to make up for those payouts. So the FDIC is kind of weird. It's not quite the same as, like, it's not a governmental department like the Department of Defense or something like that. It's a government corporation, kind of like your
Fannie
water
Mae,
utility
Freddie
board.
Mac kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of like those. And again, those can go bust too,
Mm-hmm.
um, as we've seen. But at least the structure of the FDIC, it is a little bit more clear. And yeah, if something went like catastrophically wrong, say like we talked about earlier, JP Morgan failed, the FDIC probably would require an infusion of cash from the federal government, but it would still be able to kind of pay out and prevent contagion from spreading to the rest of the financial system.
What do you think of free banking? Because that's kind of the other option that we say, all right, we go entirely the other way to radically decentralize. We make it
Mm-hmm.
very much survival of the fittest. And
Mm-hmm.
it's had periods like, what, 150 years up through Scotland and I think Northern England of incredible financial stability. Because, I mean, kind of for the listeners, basically, oh man, on the fly. Um, you have like a clearinghouse instead of like a central bank, and they are able to issue currency, and there's no reserve requirements at all. Right? It's just no, do whatever you think is best, but you have to
Mm-hmm.
be able to accept the credit from each other bank. And if you can't accept it at dollar for dollar, there's instantly trading at a discount, which causes this mechanism whereby banks can take over other ones, or they could purchase assets, or we basically get a real-time metric of the stability of the banks reflected in like the credit that they're putting out, and then we get the survival of the fittest going on. Pretty stable. Seems a little wild, but certainly worked in cases. I don't know. I'm surprised. I wonder if has Taleb ever. It's been a long time since I've read any of those books, but I feel like he talked about free banking at some point.
I don't recall. I don't know. That might be interesting for me to look into. I'm not very familiar with that system at all. So I'll write that down.
I'm
Might
gonna
be
look it
worth.
up right now.
I'm interested
You
in
know what?
looking into that.
Let's see. Said, oh man, if I could spell things, Nassim Nicholas Taleb. I can't spell Nassim. I can't even say it right. But yeah, I don't know. I don't know. I think banking is it's funny. That's what we're circling around again and again. That's the biggest too big to fail thing that I can think of. Uh, yeah. Well, what other big ideas do you think you have that really struck you? I mean, maybe we should go more towards the Catholic side and see how it links to the economic side. I feel like we've been kind of going the opposite direction most of the time.
Hmm. Are you? I was just thinking. I think one of the concepts that struck me most when I read Anti-Fragile and then Skin in the Game was the concept of soul in the game. Do you remember him talking about that? So the idea of soul, so skin in the game means that you're accountable. If something bad happens, you suffer. If something good happens, then you prosper. The idea of soul in the game, like I started reading this and it seems a lot like sanctity to me. The idea is like a life of total integrity and a willingness to take the downside for other people,
Hmm.
to use Taleb's language. And like I mean, he has this graph that's it's like a three layer chart, and one is like no skin in the game, another one is skin in the game, and the other one's soul in the game. And I'm trying to remember like one of the categories, um, but oh man, like I think one group that he says has like soul in the game is like dissenters or rebel groups. Like if you're taking up arms against like the country that you're living in, like you very clearly have soul in the game. Like everything you're doing is and again that's not like an awesome thing that we want to encourage, especially in this country. But like that's an example. A
Okay.
saint is someone who has soul in the game.
So that's,
Um,
you're trying to do it for the good of the nation, for the good of everybody. You'll
yes,
benefit too if things go well, but if things go poorly, you get drawn and quartered, and everybody else basically gets, mildly punished because you're the leader of this rebel thing.
yeah,
And then kind of
hmm
the middle category, skin in the game, would be you supported them, maybe you financially supported them. Things go well, good, bad, bad. And then on the other side could be, I don't know, the zoning department in a city. It's like, oh, a development comes in. All right, then I don't personally see a difference in my salary one tiny bit as a, zoning official, but
Well,
I
again,
block it.
again, that kind of depends. Again, it does depend. On the one hand, you aren't getting a benefit, like like you aren't getting a benefit in your salary. But if you live in that community, you'll experience that. Most city managers and city administrators are required. I think this is a standard requirement: is that you live in the city where you are a
Yeah,
manager,
good.
or that you move there pretty soon afterwards, because you need to. If you're making decisions that are affecting the city, you need to experience that.
Mm-hmm. See, that's a great law
Um,
right there. It.
yeah,
But yeah,
and that's
unfortunately,
typically a city by city policy, but I think it's pretty universal.
mhm. The disturbing part is always, well, if you allow a new building, it can drive down the value of existing building. Oh no. So now everybody who's there has an incentive to keep everybody out. Or, oh, it's a drain on city services. Or, it's going to increase traffic. Oh, it's going to take away this park. So commonly, the benefit only goes to the newcomers or disproportionately to the newcomers, and the cost is shifted disproportionately to the incumbents. So it's politically advantageous to kind of stop development, slow roll a lot of that, try to get it over to the neighboring town.
Yeah,
I actually
and
like the idea of selling the rights to develop, like selling development rights in some way,
mhm,
creating a market there, and then compensating people who own property. Because it's true, like, if for instance there's like 75 homes going right up the street from me, and I'm going to sell my house soon. So I'm like, oh, bummer, man. You increase the supply, you'll drop the price. Like, I'm not going to get as much. I
mhm,
wouldn't be selfish enough to say, well, stop 75 people from moving to where they think is best, stop the development. Do it. Go ahead. Free market.
mhm,
Politically
yeah,
and morally, that's what I think is right. But nevertheless, it's a cost to me, right? My value of my home will fall a little bit because of that. So if we sold development rights, that could get people's incentives aligned. So instead of just seeing a hit in the form of traffic and city services and in the home values, you get a little bit of a development dividend where, hey,
interesting.
if you open up if you zone that from general agriculture where they're growing nothing and you allow them to put a community, everybody in that area, maybe particularly in that precinct or district, I'm not sure, depending, we call them districts for my city.
Okay.
So that district would get the development dividend because, hey, they had a real cost. Let's give them a real benefit here. Let's try to make it closer to a market, and then people might actually be more in favor of that.
hmm Yeah, I mean, because like one of the things is there are long term consequences to not developing. Like I live in Colorado. Um, how housing prices are have generally been going up. Um, they they got much higher during 2020. We started looking for a house in February of 2020 and weren't able. We just kept getting outbid, and eventually got priced out of the single family home market. And it's like, well, I want my kids to be able to live here. If we don't develop enough housing, they won't be able to.
Mm-hmm. And the price is getting crazy.
But then you have to. That's where that's where you start. But again, like, it's hard to think that far ahead.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, if, like, say you're retired, you're thinking my home value might go down, which it might. But if you don't develop, your property taxes go up. Eventually, you might not be able to afford your property tax. And that's, again, you have to really think long term, and you have to have city council members who are willing to talk long term and to think long term like that. But then, and I mean, you, like, even if you agree, like, you still do pay a cost. So yeah, I think that something like a development dividend, I think that could be intriguing.
I think that we would get. I mean, my prediction is, if we did that, we would get more development, and if we allowed that, we would get starter homes being built again. My example is, let's say you can sell for $200 a square foot, and the builder can build it for $150 a square foot. So there's a $50 a square foot margin. All right. And the lot costs $50,000 to buy a buildable lot. What's the smallest house they can possibly build without losing money? 1,000 square feet, right? They take 50,000, divide it by 50, so 1,000 square feet. Okay, so that is the limit to where they lose money and they go out of business. So what happens if, I don't know, we make it a $75,000 house? Oh, well, if the land goes up 25,000, then the size of the house is going to have to go up in order to cover that marginal cost.
Mm-hmm.
And now your cost of a house just ballooned. It didn't go up by 25%. It went up by, what would that be? It'd be 50% larger, so it'd be 1,500 square feet. So the extra 500 square feet times 200, it went up by $100,000. Oh, uh-oh, we have like levered, in this case, 4-to-1 as we move land prices. And we're creating a minimum viable size for a new home. So we wonder, how come houses aren't affordable? How come they don't build small starter homes anymore? Huh, Brian? Well, that's the reason. It's really land costs. So we need to bring fixed costs down. And as we bring down the fixed costs, we lower the minimum viable size for a home. And it tends to be like we've pretty much pinned it, right? We're averaging like 2,500 or something nationally, somewhere around there. And if you look at the fixed costs and whatnot, it's just that they're covering as much as they possibly can, and then the homeowners are capped. We can't go any farther. So, wow, it's kind of a terrible situation. But if we just brought down the fixed cost, chiefly land and regulatory burden, fixed, done. The one economist, whose name I should remember, who came on, who was talking about this, said we can cut the price of housing in half. Mm-hmm. Yep. No biggie. I'm like, yeah, no. As a home builder, I totally agree. I could cut it in half if we had our druthers, and boy, that would make a big difference for especially like young families. Yikes.
Yeah. Your background's real estate and construction. Am I remembering that correctly? Okay.
So I have
So you've kind of seen this up front.
Oh yeah. Uh-huh. So, yeah. Well, we won't get into it, but yeah, in the trenches for sure. I mean, I'm one of the few people who are like, oh, I love high housing prices. Are you kidding me? It's wonderfully unaffordable. I love unaffordable. Oh yeah, there's nothing to buy. Isn't it awesome? I'm on the other side of this train. Don't get me wrong. I'm trying to fix it as fast as I can, but no, I'm thrilled with these unaffordable housing prices and the shortage. It's great. One more thing I wanted to bring up, and then we should probably start wrapping up. The barbell strategy. You remember the barbell strategy?
I do.
Yeah. I was kind of thinking about that, kind of filling the listeners who haven't read all the books. Go read all the books, guys. It'll go quick. They're page turners. Basically, he says, do a strategy where you're super, super safe on one end. Let's say you're investing. you hold some cash, you hold maybe some really quality dividend paying stocks, maybe a few treasuries or something. I don't know. I'm worried about those lately. Um, and then on the other side, you go way speculative, which exposes you to a lot of upside. And you can apply this to a variety of things. Maybe you have a 9 to 5 job that pays all the bills and you're certain that everything's fine. And then you also have a side gig that you think could really blow up one day. And that's kind of what he
Mm-hmm.
suggests is you kind of divide it between those two. I don't know what your thought about it that is and how it relates to Catholic social teaching and just Catholic faith in total, but the
Mm-hmm.
thought I had was um that's exactly what you do in the spiritual life. Like exactly. Where you're told, okay, um avoid mortal sin. That's the one
Yes.
side of the barbell strategy. Just don't screw it
Be
up.
safe.
Don't go to hell.
Yeah.
So tick off the don't go to hell box. That's the most important thing. Get rid of mortal sin. All right. Now the next part is Paul says, run the race as to win it. So it's absolutely after you just don't go to hell, everything else is a winner's game. You're supposed to try to set yourself up for the massive, largest amount of upside possible. Go
Mm-hmm.
save a bazillion
Yeah.
souls. Go do whatever you possibly can. Live a radical, wild life of holiness. Yeah, there you go. Don't go to hell, and then go buck wild as far as trying to get upside.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good summary of it. Yeah. Be safe. I think Taleb calls this the via negativa, avoid harm. Um, and yeah, avoid sin, avoid especially mortal sin. And as long as you're avoiding mortal sin, find the areas where you can grow substantially in virtue. Find the areas where you can go be a saint.
Mm-hmm.
Um, raise your kids. I mean, I say that as a father of three. Like it requires heroic virtue.
Mm-hmm.
It's something I'm very much still working on. Something I expect to continue working on the rest of my life. Um, go. Um, oh goodness. I mean, live your live your faith publicly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Um, be again be prudent in how you maybe how you talk about things to certain people, but like evangelize, help your parish, um, be generous with your money, like on the financial side, and be generous with your time, be generous with your talent.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, trying to think of some type of practical advice here, but I mean, I guess for people who are like young and single, I think the barbell strategy should look like you got to get some baseline amount of stability, like make sure that you have a place in a car and a good job and things like that. Then after that, try to make your life way, way better. Like go and try to find a husband or a wife, like the best one
Mm-hmm.
possible, right? And,
Yeah.
just take care of the most basic things like I'm eating and drinking and sleeping, and then go go crazy. And then I think for people who are married and with families, there's kind of a larger. I think it gets a little bit more conservative because you have lots of people in your care, but you can't forget about a few of those major upside opportunities that are easy to kind of forget about. It doesn't have to be financial. Could be moral. Could be something you could do for your church. Could be something you just do in your life. But I mean, I think the temptation for people who are like younger or single is to forget the one side of the barbell and just life is just always chasing after some type of exciting whatever thing and being drawn in by say a YouTube personality who promises you to get rich or super buff or whatever else, and to forget like the boring stable things that you need to kind of plant in your life. And then once you get to middle age, are we middle age? We're not middle age. Once you get to having a family and whatnot, is the temptation's the opposite, is to not actually keep your eyes peeled for those radical upside opportunities that God wants you to have. We're just supposed to run the race to win it. Yeah, yeah. Well, cool. Well,
Yeah,
I'll tell
God
you what.
created the world good. God
Yeah.
created the world and it is good, and like we are to enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
God
Mm-hmm.
is here for a reason.
Yep. Well, I'll tell you what. If you know of any other ones we can hit, go for it. If not, I'll try to kind of do some type of little summary here of
Hmm.
a few of the ideas he has and kind of things that we said, and then we'll wrap it on up.
I mean, let's see. I think we talked about the day to day, talked about things like wealth concentration, yeah, talked about regulations, we've talked about the risk and how things aren't safe. Talked a lot about economics. Um, yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I had. I mean, from the black swan thing, we kind of have the fat tails. If anybody remembers
Hmm.
that, it's this fat tail event. So you get the distribution, but it turns out the left and right tails are fatter than one might think. And that's something we actually like know from financial markets too. Like, I'm not sure if you do you do any like options trading?
Again, I'm not trading my job. I've looked at options in my own accounts and thought, nope, this feels riskier than I want to deal with.
It is risky. I've had my head in options trading for a little bit and have been doing some. And one thing I realized was you've heard of the Black Scholes option like calculation. You do your price
It's
options based on the Black Scholes one.
familiar to me.
Okay, so one thing that threw me for a loop was when you look at all the numbers, like all the Greeks and everything, you look through everything, there's something called implied volatility. And you see, well, what's the implied volatility based on this price and the strike price and date and whatnot? And what I didn't understand was the implied volatility is different for each strike price. What? Why are you implying a different amount of volatility? It doesn't make sense, right? Like, it should be
Interesting.
priced based on the amount of volatility that you have. I don't understand. So looked into it, and it's actually a remnant of if you take the Black Scholes calculation to come up with, say, all the data that you typically get for an options trade, built into that is a normal distribution of risk. But there isn't a normal distribution of risk, right? So
There's
what
not.
you do is if you assume a normal distribution, then something has to flex, something has to give. You need a variable to move in order to accurately represent the actual price in the market. So what moves is the whatever the heck I was saying, implied volatility. So it actually, on the edges, you'll find very different implied volatility numbers than what you might think. Like you'd imagine they would all be similar and then priced according to a distribution. They're not, because the market has recognized, the market's smart, and it recognizes that those tail ends are more frequent than a normal distribution would say. So options pricing actually includes the fact of fat tails, which is neat because
Interesting.
if you look on like say S&P 500 options and you look even something close 30 days out, there is a real price for the market could hit 3,000. It's like,
Mhm.
what? That seems
Yeah.
insane. It's like people are actually paying for protection against the risk that it's going to go below 3,000 because it could.
Yeah.
It's a fat tail
Okay.
event, right? Um, so that's really neat. Um, but yeah, we're not
Yeah. I
supposed to be
think that's how
focused.
Taleb made his money.
What's that?
That's how Taleb made his money was using put options on the banking system in 2008, where he
What a
bought these
hero.
options in '06 and '07, and then he was able to exercise them in 2007, 2008, and made a
Wow.
ton of money.
Wow. Yeah, I put right before the tariffs and whatnot, I was looking at the pricing of everything. I'm like, I don't look for smoke. I don't look for fire. I look for tinder. And
Yep.
by then, I said, "Oh,
Mhm.
everything's looking very fragile. I don't like this." So I bought a put option, strike price of 5,000 on the S&P 500, and probably luck. Tariffs turned out to be worse. Things went awry, and I loved that crash. It was a lovely crash. I'm like, yes. Um, but yeah, put options. I mean, it's nice to be on the. It's kind of like I'm on the other side of the trade for housing. So when you see things get
Mhm.
worse and worse, oh, you have a benefit. Hedging your bets can be nice. That's important. It's part of an overall safe strategy is hedging your bets against the worst outcomes. Um,
Mhm.
So we got black swan events, fat tails, biblical injunction to basically ignore the noise of day-to-day life and to focus
Mhm.
only on the things which are most important. I think that's generally, I think that's good advice. Makes sense. Oh, how about this? This is one that we didn't talk about, and we just got to bring it up. I know we're kind of wrapping up the episode, but you know, I'm listing a lot of this stuff. So a lot of it is just reflecting on the bullet points you sent me. So
Sure.
for the listeners, don't think that these are all my thoughts. There's a reason I brought Brian on. Do you remember the part about wild randomness? What is it? I think that's in the Black Swan book. But basically, we look for patterns in these random things. It's fooled by randomness. That was the name of the book. I don't know if you read that one, but there's commonly random patterns that we retrospectively apply a narrative to when
Mhm.
we probably shouldn't. And he, as a risk manager, understood that this is just a problem with human beings sometimes when we're assessing risk is we look in the past and we overestimate our confidence in why it happened because we put a narrative on top of what could have been a set of random events in the past, and it gives us this hubris. And instead we got to be approaching everything with humility, you know.
Mhm.
And I think the humble way is to accept that there are times when things are simply random and we don't know why. And the scriptural passage that came to mind with this is, do you remember the part, I think it's in Matthew, where a bunch of people come to Jesus and they're like, Jesus, there was a tower that fell on a bunch of people and
Yeah.
killed them. Were they more wicked
Yep.
than the other people? So something random happened, right? A tower fell down and smushed some people. They happened to be underneath
Yes.
randomly. And what they were doing was they were retroactively applying a narrative about, well, bad things happen to bad people, good things happen to good people. We can understand this in our framework. But Jesus is basically saying, this is kind of like arrogant thinking here. You don't
Yes.
know the mind of God. You don't know his plan, and you don't know their hearts, and you can't extrapolate from this little data. He's like, here's what I will tell you. If you don't repent, if you don't fix yourself, you'll get smushed by something. you know, and then there's the other example of the people who got slaughtered and something happened
In
to
the
them.
temple.
And he's like, same deal. He's like, same deal. Like, don't always just apply your narrative and pridefully think that you understand the goings on. Some things are just out of your control and you just need to accept that. And also, the lesson he pulls from that is it could happen to you, right? Isn't
Mhm.
that interesting?
It is. No, I I think that makes perfect sense. We don't I mean, I think that's the whole point of the end of the book of Job.
Mm,
Job is asking for the explanation, and then finally God comes out of the storm and goes, "Who are you? Tell Where were you when I fixed the foundations of the world? Tell me, for you were there. You know so
I
much."
love that section.
Um,
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's one of my favorite sections. But here's the other thing that I thought is interesting about that. Job has been upset. He's been in agony and in anguish. And then finally, God speaks to him and says, "Who are you?"
Hmm.
And kind of, I mean, essentially puts Job in his place, reprimands him. And Job is comforted.
Yeah. What is that?
I mean, well, like this is something I've been thinking about. There's a book I'd highly recommend. It's called Evil and the Justice of God by an Anglican bishop named N.T. Wright, who's a well-known scripture scholar. Um, and one of the things that he talks about is that, I mean, evil is random. It doesn't make sense
Mm-hmm.
in our world. Um, and like I mean, there's all sorts of explanations and like what's called theodicies about it, but they don't comfort. Like knowing that good comes out of evil. Okay, great. Like my like my wife just died, or my kid, like something happened to my child. That's no comfort to me. But one of the things that he points out is that God refuses to explain the why to us, but He's given us the Bible, and He's given us the story telling us what He's doing about it. And I think that kind of fits in with what we've been talking about. We don't understand the causes. We don't understand, like in many cases we don't understand the causes. Random things happen.
Mm-hmm.
Things happen.
Yeah,
But
oh, keep going,
when we
keep
trust
going.
providence, when we trust in providence, when we put ourselves in God's presence in the suffering, that's where we can that's where we can find strength to move forward. That's where we can find comfort.
Yeah. I guess I have two thoughts. One just flew out of my head. No, wait, it's back. Flew back in. The one is, I always like to think, it's the economic question, compared to what, right? I always just ask compared to what, just reflexively.
Mhm.
And I think, all right, evil's random. We feel like it's random. Yeah, God's providence and whatnot. But we can truly treat evil as random, at least from our perspective. All right, what
Mhm.
would that be compared to? Well, what if it wasn't random? What would it be based on? Well, to me, I
Mhm.
see two possibilities, two main categories. One is um, good always happens to good people, evil to evil, or maybe the reverse, right?
Yep.
No, so in those, right, like that seems to be the two. It's either random or it's always to the one or always to the other. So if good always happened to good people, then how on earth would we know who was a good person? How on earth would we know that we were choosing God for God's own sake? And that's kind of the Job question, right? Like if everything good always happens to the good guy, like who are you, Job? Like, do you love me or
Mhm.
do you love the stuff? Like, yeah, I don't think that we would actually reveal what people's character would be. They wouldn't have an opportunity to act, in a sense, really freely. And the alternative is if evil things always happen to good people, always, like that was the rule. Well, that seems to show something wrong about the character of God, right? Like
Yes.
he set up the universe so that it always hurts good people. I'd go, ooh, who's who's God? I wouldn't want to worship him. So in the first case, he wouldn't like. There's a problem with me, and like how I would develop, and how I come to know myself in light of God. And in the second case, it's how I would even understand who God's character would be to begin with. So if we say that the purpose of the universe, the purpose of our creation, is to know and love God, and to enter into a communion of love whereby we know one another and love what is good about one another, it almost seems necessary that we're not in one of the former categories, which means we have to have it random. We have to have
Yes.
an uneven random distribution of good to good and bad to bad in order to
Mhm.
have self revelation of both sides, right? Us to God and God to them. Um, what was the other thing I was thinking? I don't know. I don't know. Maybe that one will come back into my head.
Maybe.
Oh, I do. I have it. Um, I like to give just an evil in general. I like to give the example. Like, I think that the main purpose of the universe that God made is for union of free creatures in love. And you just think, like, go ahead. I'm going to permission to brag here, Brian. I want you to introduce yourself to me only with the most impressive things about you. Just pick a few really impressive. Just go ahead. Just try it. Try it for the sake of the listener. Who are you, Brian? Tell me something really wild and awesome that makes you sound amazing. Go.
Oh goodness.
Doesn't have to be the most amazing thing, but just go ahead.
I mean, I think one of if you want to ask is just one of the things I'm curious about a lot of different things and I'm able to connect them.
Mm-hmm.
So like Taleb and Catholic social thought, history, Taleb Catholic social thought, study political science and history um, in college. I can connect those to the theology classes that I took. I can connect those to the things that I'm reading now. I can connect that to the literature I'm reading, and to the economics that I've dabbled in, finance industry that I work in, and then the municipal government municipal government sector that I used to work in.
See, you're still
And I
you're
can
still
start
too
seeing the
nice.
connections.
You still won't like. Let me just make up some things. If you said, "Hi, I'm Brian. I have $4 million in my bank account because I beat the market every single year, and
Ooh, that'd
also
be nice.
everything in my entire life is amazing and perfect," people would be like, "Ugh." It's hard to even say those things, right? You don't even want to say like the very best things about yourself to somebody introducing, because you seem like you're bragging, and it completely voids the purpose of the social interaction, right? But like, have you
Hmm.
ever bumped into somebody, or just seen two people meet who have like had the same really difficult circumstance? Like if you're um like two people who's like had their parents die early on, like two or they meet, and there's instantly like bang a connection between the two of them.
Hmm.
They just like bang, they're connected instantly, and that happens through bad things. That happens through loss. people were instantly connected. And I think that's a lot of the reason behind, taking a very theological turn, I think that's a lot of the reason behind, the crucifixion, and why that's like the way God revealed himself to us. And it matches what they did back in the Middle East, and they do to this day, is they'll make these blood oaths between people, and they'll cut their hand, the other person will cut their hand,
Yeah.
and you shake. So it combines your life together. And it's kind of showing that when we're both wounded, it's not just like a wound, which we just cry about. It's an opportunity for communion, for actual joining lives together. So with Jesus, it's like, okay, cool. Yeah, put your hand on my side. Go ahead, touch the wounded palms. He's like, join your life with my life through my wounds. Why is evil there? It's like, well, you can't always give a great answer, but one answer you can always give is it's always a call to communion. Because everybody you've ever met who has a similar wound to you, or any wound, and all wounds are kind of similar, it's an opportunity to actually link together and feel close to somebody. And if the whole purpose of the universe is communion of love between free creatures, well, boy, that seems about right.
Yep.
Heck, suffering on
God
a
wants
sports
humanity.
team or a military group, you see those guys, like guys who went to war together, they're all joined together, right? They're all so close, for the rest of your life. But so when we lose all of our money in the stock market, me and you, we can cry about it over a beer, and it'll be great. Well, let's wrap it on up. Thanks so much for coming on, Brian.
Thanks for inviting me.
I really never thought about the connection between these things, honestly, until like really hard, until this morning, when I thought, oh, I have to talk to Brian. And when you gave me that list of stuff, just thing after thing, I'm like, boy, it makes sense. And what it reminds me of is in the Gospels, there's one group that does get praised. I think it's in a parable. Jesus talks about that one guy who is writing down notes, debt notes, and cushioning his retirement. He says, I'm too proud to dig. I'm too old to do something else, and I know what I'll do. I'll just change the debt notes for my master's thing for all of the suppliers, so that they'll be nice to me in my retirement when I get fired. This is probably a terrible rendition of that parable, but God says, the sons of this age are wise. And it's interesting, that's actually not the only time where it's people in finance are pointed out to be particularly prudent and wise. And in Proverbs, it even says that the crown of wisdom is wealth. So it makes an explicit connection between being wise and becoming wealthy. And it just points out that even the people who are without religion, when they really focus on wealth creation, whether they like it or not, they do arrive at wisdom. Like, these are the people who are wise in the present age. And it's like, he's not pointing to the Pharisees. Weirdly, he's pointing to the money guys. And like, what is, it's crazy, right?
Because there is a kind of wisdom there.
Right.
It might not be the fullness of wisdom, but there is wisdom.
Right. And I don't know, I think we did a decent job showing it today. Somebody who's been successful in the market, and somebody who's really thought hard about risk management and how to deal with risk distributions from a finance side. He's also religious. He's Eastern Orthodox, I think. But yeah, it dovetails really, really well. Just the practical nuts and bolts financial wisdom into the moral life. I mean, and it makes sense. Part of the greatest commandment: love the Lord your God with all your mind, your heart, your strength. Strength is inclusive of financial strength explicitly in every commentary ever. So yeah, I mean, it's something to learn. Well, we'll wrap it up for real there, Brian. Thanks so much.
Thank you,
Listeners,
Jake.
join me for the next episode. I promise there will be one day. I'm back. All right, cool. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later, Jake. Thank you.